we have Laura Birenbaum presenting Raising Cuttles and Pajama Squid. Laura is the proud owner and founder of ReefGen, a wholesale coral and fish aquaculture company in Long Island, New York. ReefGen is dedicated to propagating a diverse selection of coral frags in collaboration with the Long Island Aquarium and Exhibition Center and its world-renowned 20,000-gallon reef tank run by Joe Yaiullo. When not behind her desk running the business, Laura's focus and passion at ReefGen has been breeding a variety of cuttlefish, including Stumpy, Flamboyant, Officinalis cuttles, and most recently, the rare Pajama Squid. All of ReefGen's cephalopods and frags are distributed through aquarium retailers, e-tailers, and service companies across the country. Laura has successfully bred 8 generations of Stumpy Cuttlefish and looks forward to increasing the distribution of all these unique captive bred invertebrates across the country. I present to you Ms. Laura Birenbaum.
So much. Hello, everybody. It's been such an amazing conference. Have you guys been having fun? I've been having a blast. The vendors have been revolutionary new products with animals and equipment, and speakers have been great. So I'm actually really excited to be here because I get to talk to you about something I'm incredibly passionate about, and they happen to be very cool at the same time. So let's get into this. All right. So a little overview about what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to go through the background of how we got into cuttlefish, give you a little biology lesson on them, and talk to you about the husbandry requirements for these cuttles. Then I'm going to show you all their cool behaviors in breeding and some issues, because it's not all fun and games with these little critters. So I want to let you guys know, I want to give you the tools in order to keep these cuttles. They're not for everybody, but I want to give you the best shot at them. And we can explore the challenges together, because like if I just tell you all the things that went right, then I won't share the things where you can go wrong too. And I want you to be a little inspired too. So a little background on me. I've been doing this for 15 years, working in the industry. Started at a fish shop as a sales clerk, and in California. I've been loving diving and keeping fish for my entire life. I got my marine biology degree at Western Washington University, and I volunteered at Steinhardt. I also had a reef shop in Bellingham, Washington, and I don't know if you can see the business card there. The name of the shop was The Chronic Reefer, and if anyone who's familiar with the Pacific Northwest, they'll know that it has a double meaning there. It was not my choice, because it just turned into a big confusion, as customers would walk in for a different reason, get terrified, and make a U-turn and going, what is this place? So it was a great shop, though. I love working with coral. And I got into the wholesale industry selling lighting with ice cap lighting, and then I got into LEDs with A-can lighting, and I became enchanted with wholesale, and I knew that I wanted to get into that. So 6 years ago, I moved to the East Coast. I was inspired by this incredible 20,000-gallon reef tank at the Long Island Aquarium. And I'm looking at this tank, and I'm looking at Joe surplusing these corals. And I realized there's an opportunity here. How can we get these corals across the country? So after settling out, these are Joe's wonderful boys, and this is Joe holding my Aquarist of the Year award last year. No, I joke. He was the winner, and not anymore. You had to hand over your title, didn't you? Oh, so sad. But he had 20,000 gallons of mother colonies for me to play with. So with this at my fingertips, I got to start fragging and growing out colonies behind the scenes. And I began the company ReefGen with Justin Grable. So we have troughs behind the scenes at the Long Island Aquarium. We produce LPS, SPS, and anything from rarities to coral that's been in the industry for over 20 years. And just because it's been in the industry over 20 years doesn't make it any less beautiful. Just hardy and consistent. We also work with a smattering of captive bred fish. We do seahorses and clownfish, and every now and then, if the aquarium produces some things like gobies and monos, we'll be able to distribute that. I've been distributing seahorses from Alyssa's Seahorse Savvy, and she has a beautiful selection. You can see the piebald and the series seahorses. They're a lot of fun to work with, very hardy. So fish are great. They're a lot of fun, but I was looking for something a little bit more. So about 7 years ago, I saw a lecture by this guy, and he was talking about dwarf cuttlefish, and I completely fell in love. And lucky enough, not that long after, Live Aquaria called me up and they said, hey, we've been getting these egg bundles of bendensis and we've been having a hard time raising them. We know that your facility raises Flamboyant cuttlefish, which is the Long Island Aquarium. And we're wondering if we could send you some eggs, see if you could have a better shot at them. So I said, sure, yeah, I'll take a bundle of eggs. And quickly from there began an empire. So suddenly sepia and cephalopods is the genus for Pajama Squid. So I've been able to work with 4 species so far. I've worked with Officinalis, bendensis, Pajama Squid, and Flamboyant. I'm going to be referring to them all as cuttles. Cephalopods is actually a genus of bobtail squid, but they're in the cuttle order. I'm not going to be talking about flamboyant cuttlefish, unfortunately. I know everybody loves the flamboyant. And the reason for that is that they're incredibly rare in the wild. People aren't sure about their conservation status. I don't want to get you guys excited about them, especially because despite all of my tools and research into the subject, I've not been able to keep one live for longer than 6 months. I get them to breed, they lay eggs, but they're very delicate. So till we're producing captive bred flamboyants in any number, we'll save that subject for another day. So why to keep cuttles? Cuttles are, as you know, very charismatic. This is a group of Officinalis begging for food at the front glass. So every time we come above the aquarium, they're like little puppy dogs looking for food. They're interactive with their owners. And one of the big benefits about cuttlefish that I appreciate over octopuses is that they don't escape their aquarium. You don't need to have astroturf around the rim of your aquarium. I've had 2 jumpers, but frankly, they're less jumpy than wrasses. So they're pretty stationary. When you put them somewhere, they stay. And they're adaptable. So the captive bred cuttlefish, after generations of breeding, really, they're going to take on any compartment you put them in pretty much, and they're going to be cool with it. Again, not all fun and games. So cuttlefish are known for their short lifespan. The cuttles that I work with tend to live for only about a year. Every now and then you can get an Officinalis somewhere closer to 2 years. I've heard you can get a PJ squid to 2 years, but it's a balance between temperature and husbandry. They do ink, so inking events can kill your entire tank if you don't have the proper equipment for it. They eat an enormous amount of food, and they produce, consequently, an enormous amount of waste. Now, I'm not talking about like mechanical things that you need to clean up. I'm talking about ammonia. They can be a little delicate, so once you get them settled, they do great, but until they're settled, you can have mortalities, you can have illness, and feeding can be tricky because a lot of the times you need live food for them. So they're not suitable for all aquarists. You need to do research ahead of time, but once you have your research and you have the foundations of taking care of them in place, a great aquarist can do it, no problem. I have no doubt that everybody in this room can keep a cuttlefish. So what is the cuttlefish? So right here we're looking at the phylum of mollusks, and they are in the mollusk phylum. They are in the cephalopod class, which includes squid, octopuses, nautiluses, and there's a bunch of weirdo classes too from deep sea cephs. So the genus of cuttlefish is sepia, and then you see the arrow below that, that's the bobtail squid genus, which is Cephalopods. So a little bit about their blueprint. So cuttlefish have 8 arms, 2 feeding tentacles. The 2 long tentacles, which you see as a traditional outline for a squid, are usually kept rolled up underneath in these retractile pouches. They have suckers on the ends of all of their arms. They have a mantle, which contains their respiration. Their gills are exposed to the air in this mantle cavity. as you can see from that cuttle puffing away down there. And here's another unfortunate video. This is a deformity that demonstrates the mantle's respiration function. Obviously, this is not an ideal situation. This poor little guy had some sort of deviation in his mantle where every time he took a breath in, he had that little bubble. So, you know, it could have been better. It didn't work out for him, but it gives us a visual aid of what we're talking about here. They have primitive blood, which is really shockingly interesting. Their blood cells are hemocytes, and they only have one type of blood cell, this hemocyte. They don't have white blood cells, red blood cells, T cells, just one, which uniquely has to perform all the functions of the rest of our blood. So it has to carry oxygen, nutrients, take away waste, and it has to take care of the entire immune response. So cuttles can be susceptible to infection, and the reason is because this hemocyte cell, while it does have some interesting immune responses, they're primitive. So the cool things that the hemocyte can do is that they do phagocytosis, where they will eat the bacteria or the virus. They will eject nitric oxide and other oxidases at the invader, which is fascinating. There's a number of papers on that. And they're in charge of wound closure and healing of any open sores on the cuttle. They also flocculate pathogens. So instead of removing it and killing it, oftentimes they'll either eat it or they'll actually accumulate around it to sort of neutralize the threat. And that being said, I believe that the immune response is short because cuttles live a fast and furious lifestyle. If they're only living for a year, they need to get everything done in a hurry, and along with that is they don't spend a lot of energy healing. They spend a lot of energy on breeding. So you want to try to keep them as healthy as possible. They have an insanely high metabolism. And what I mean by that, they have a metabolism that is produces 2 to 3 times as much ammonia as the highest metabolism teleost fish and sharks and rays. So here is the graph. The top line shows a common octopus's metabolic rate, which is higher, significantly higher than that of the albacore tuna, bull shark, and a scalloped hammerhead, which are extremely high energy creatures. So they also eat a pure protein diet. They actually can't metabolize lipids or carbohydrates, and they have a very fast growth rate. So with this high metabolism, they have to eat quite a bit. Their food assimilation rate, adults can grow as much as 5% per day. Babies can grow up to 12% per day. And it makes you have to adapt your life support accordingly. Now, despite how much food they eat, this is their poop, which looks like a gelatinous wisp. So they will eat 10 shrimp, and this is the only thing that comes out to show you how much nitrogen they are producing accordingly. So, what does this mean in terms of how to keep them? You have to oversize their filtration in order to take care of the biological load. Trickle filters are actually popular. Remember trickle filters? So I actually have bioballs in my system. In a reef conference, it's kind of a dirty word sometimes, but I'm actually very excited to try MaxSpec's new media because it has such porosity, and that's what I need in order to hold all the bacteria to make sure that we don't have ammonia in the tank. You have to feed them a lot and often. With that high metabolism, it's high consequences. So if you don't give them enough food, they are going to crash and die in a hurry. And you can only feed them protein. So people like to enrich food ahead of time. Frankly, I did not do much enriching of the grass shrimp before I fed them to my bendensis. But if you do enrich them, don't feed it algae pellets. Feed it another protein because it's just going to be a waste. So another important part of their skin and their biology is microvillous single-cell depth epidermis. Need I say more? Maybe I do need to say more. So this is a fascinating skin that with a single cell depth is incredibly porous, and it acts more like a gut lining, more like a membrane than a protective layer, which is great if you're in a homogeneous ocean that never changes parameters and never has any toxicity, and you can absorb oxygen through your skin. It's going to be dandy, but in a closed system where parameters are fluctuating and there are potential toxins, it makes them very susceptible to, vulnerable to parameter changes. So it makes them sensitive. And part of the reason is that they're sensitive to metals is because of this microvillus epidermis. And they are very sensitive to copper, reminding people that copper will be embedded in things like PVC, acrylic, of course, calcium substrate, sand, rocks. So if you want to set up a tank for cuttlefish, you need to make sure that that stuff has never had a dream of touching anything with a heavy metal like copper ick treatment. They are surprisingly sensitive to salinity. So the LD50, where you lose 50% of the sample size dies when exposed to a certain level, that was 2 parts per thousand change per hour with these cuttlefish. So if you're thinking about a drip acclimation and you get your cuttles in at, let's say, 1024 and your tank is at 1026, you could potentially kill them if you do not drip them very, very slowly. And I do not think I have a slide on it, but in terms of acclimation, you also have to make sure that you don't aerate them. They're very tolerant of hypoxic situations, probably because of their microvillus epidermis, but they are sensitive to ammonia. So if you are acclimating them, usually you throw an air stone in there. Air stone is going to change the pH and liberate the ammonia that was previously in a non-toxic form and could kill them with kindness. So I know of some cephalopod experts who go so far that when they're acclimating the cuttles, they actually wrap the bag around the airline dripping in so that ambient air doesn't come in contact with their water to liberate that ammonia. So nitrates can be a problem. Nitrates over 50 milligrams per liter stunts growth, affects fecundity, and provides acute mortalities in squid. While they are pretty tolerant in some degree, I bred 9 generations of bendensis in Joe's system with nitrates fluctuating between 20 and 40. They were fine. They grew. I produced plenty of babies. That being said, I have a cuttle system that's running at about 50 to 60 nitrates because I'll explain that later, but it's a challenge. And I've had losses of Officinalis. It appears that Officinalis are one of those species that really can't take nitrates. Fish can take up to 200 in nitrates, but cephalopods are more intolerant. And they're sensitive to bacteria because of their primitive immune system. So things like Vibrio and Pseudomonas can be a challenge to them. A lot of people will run a UV sterilizer for this reason. So again, oversize your system. Make sure that there is as much water volume as you can afford. If you're doing you only have room for a small exhibit, throw a huge sump downstairs. Plan ahead. Protein skimming is really important. Protein skimming is important to oxygenate the water, provide that stability, take out the normal stuff, and you have to remember if they're eating pure protein and they're excreting any lipids that were in their food, you're going to have a lot of ways that the protein skimmer will be ideal for. Carbon and GFO is really important too. This is what's going to prevent a catastrophic situation if you have an inking event. So I call it an inking event because either there's some sort of nuisance that has upset the entire tank and they'll black out the tank, or it'll trigger each other. So the panic spreads. Auto top-off is a good idea again because they are sensitive to salinity changes, nitrate management, and I also recommend nitrate management. Keep the nitrates down, get water changes in place. Maybe consider an algae reactor. I'm looking at Tristan's arid algae reactors in order to try to deal with my nitrate situation accordingly. So here is a brief overview of what aquariums are required for the 3 species that we're going to be talking about today. So for bendensis, they are tropical cuttlefish, and a quick and easy way to describe what a bendensis needs is if you have a happy reef tank, it's going to be a happy cuttlefish. In fact, you can keep these cuttlefish in a reef tank, and they do quite well. People say, what coral can I keep with them? I say, just like avoid carpet anemones or any gross offenders like that, and you'll be fine. Bendensis cuttles get to be about 4 or 5 inches. So in terms of tank space of what they can live in, you want to do about a 30-gallon is the minimum. But that being said, again, this is only referring to the physical space that the cuttlefish is in. You want a huge system to back up the filtration of those animals. These cuttlefish are really pretty social. The bendensis, I can keep up to 50 cuttles in a 30-gallon tank without a problem. Let's get a rogue male. You want to do areas of low flow for the bendensis in order to give them a place to rest. They do come from a reef environment, so they're familiar with waves. You don't have to baby them too much. But at the same time, you want to give them areas where they can relax. They want vertical structures like fake corals, gorgonians, real coral, something like that that they kind of perch in, like a shelf. Rock is fine too. You could just set up a normal reef. Pajama squid, on the other hand, are substrate animals. So they bury in the sand, and consequently, they have no interest or need for structure in their tank. The only structures I put in the PJ squid tank are clamshells, and that's for breeding. Otherwise, they happily will sit in the middle of a sand bed, bury down, and go like, I'm invisible, this is great. But we just let them keep thinking that. Pajama squid are pretty small. They only grow to be about 2.5 inches. Last night I heard a story of our previous speaker coming down and stepping on a pajama squid, and they called it dinner roll size, so apparently they can get pretty chunky. And then the Officinalis cuttle, they grow fairly large. In the wild, they grow up to be a foot. In captivity, typically, we see them between 7 and 10 inches. Pajama squid and Officinalis run a little cooler. Pajama squid you want to keep in the 60 to 76 range. You do not want to go above 76. That can cause acute mortalities. And for the Officinalis, typically they're kept between 55 and 65 degrees. That being said, we have kept them at 78 degrees, and I raised a group of cuttles to very quickly, with that increased heat and increased metabolism, to several months in 78-degree water, and they were very happy, and then something happened. So if you're running a higher temperature, if you're kind of pushing the limits there, you also need to know that if something starts to go a little bit wrong, it's going to go very wrong very quickly when you bring them above their temperature range. For Officinalis, you want to give them fake seagrass in order to lay their eggs, and they don't seem to care about structure either. So there you go. So this is the setup that I've been using previously. This is the, I have 3 100-gallon tanks above Joe's reef tank. Each tank has removable dividers, 9 removable dividers, in order to keep groups of babies separate, ages different, and any problematic males separate from the group. This is my new system. So this is a 300-gallon system that I recently built about a year ago, and it consists of this 8-foot trough, a 180-gallon glass tank, MRC sump, and 4 10-gallon tanks. Now, I used to be flip about the needs of cuttlefish in terms of water parameters because I was using Joe's 20,000-gallon sump designed to keep an amazing selection of coral. And then I built this system, and I became very sensitive to how challenging it is to manage the nitrates in a closed system. Despite it being 300 gallons, like I said, we've been running at 50 to 60 for nitrates. So here's a little action shot of keeping cuttlefish. This is my main employee, Jeff, at the aquarium. He has been in charge of the Pajama Squid and the Officinalis and the bendensis. He's great. Comes from Wonders of Wildlife. All right. Oh. There was a video. Not anymore. That's fine. It was just an action shot of what a lot of cuttlefish keeping is, which is staring at the tank. What is that one doing? Why are they gathered in this area? How is their interaction socially? And I wanted to take a moment to talk about redundancies for the cuttlefish in order to keep them safe. We need to keep the system at 70 degrees to keep the Bandensis and to keep the Officinalis and the PJs at a temperature that is achievable for the people that we're distributing to, while at the same time safe for them. And in order to keep it from going above 76, which again could be deadly for the Pajama Squid, we have a 1 horsepower chiller on this little system. And in order to make sure that that chiller doesn't fail, there's a temperature controller built into the chiller, and I have a Renko as a backup to shut it off in case there's a problem with it. The heater also has a temperature sensor within it and is on a backup Renko in order to make sure that it doesn't fail on or off. And the auto top-off system is also kept safe by not being plumbed directly into an RO or a large reservoir. My auto top-off for this system is only 10 gallons, and I fill it by a bucket. So I don't have the possibility of the RO flipping in the on position, the flow valve getting stuck, and flooding my system with fresh water. The lights are on timers, and on top of that, we have ambient light in the room, and I created a little sleeping mask for them, a tank cover with holes in it to mimic moonlight. So every day at 5, their lights go off at 3. I put this tank cover on at 5, so it doesn't really matter if the ambient lights take longer to go off for the aquarium, although they're pretty good about that. All right. Oh, well, there's the video. This is Jeff hard at work. So this is our Pajama Squid trough here, and he's checking the trough for eggs. And it's actually filled with Pajama Squid in this shot, but they're all buried. They're poking their little eyes up. It's a thoughtful experience. So people are wondering about tank mates often with cuttlefish. We really recommend keeping it to be a species-specific aquarium for cuttles. But that being said, you definitely want some cleanup crew in there. So for leftover food, if they're not going to eat all of their shrimp, if you're feeding them frozen, you really want a pretty aggressive cleanup crew. Do things like brittle stars, Nazaria snails, chocolate chip stars. Usually they advise against that in most of our situations, but they're great cleanup. They eat everything and anything. They're voracious. And small hermit crabs, you want to keep it small enough that they don't walk over to a little PJ sleeping in the sand and start picking away. Blue legs, things like that. And algae eaters, of course. We want a good team of Astrea, Turbo, Trochus. Sea urchins are good. But it's important to keep these, this is a little baby cuttlefish aiming for a shrimp that's a lot bigger than what he should be eating. And my point with this is that if they think that they have a chance at eating it, they're going to try. So anything like a wrasse or a algae blenny, they're going to try to eat it. Anything oblong is at risk of getting eaten. So what about friends? I do recommend keeping cuttlefish with other cuttlefish. When they become mature, you want to make sure that the males aren't getting too aggressive with the females or other males, but at the same time, you can often luck out and have a big group of males all together living a happy bachelor lifestyle. This video here, I recommend you don't mix species because, again, they can trigger that predatory response of like, I think I can eat this guy. And that being said, I had a unique opportunity to film a Pajama Squid that had somehow gotten past the barrier into the Bandensis compartment. And I thought we might get to watch some interesting behavior, and instead, neither party seemed to give two hoots about the other. So, not that I recommend this combination, especially because of the temperature differences, but I thought it was interesting to see all of these Bandensis are coming over because they're interested in shrimp behind it. That's why they glide right past it. Now that PJ is not in his most comfortable coloration, he is showing some stripes going like, okay, everybody calm down, back off. I need to point out you really don't want to mix cuttle sizes too. You want to keep ages pretty separate. If there's going to be a 25% difference in sizes, you have a risk of the older cuttle preying on the younger one. And you don't want to keep them with fish. It's a risk to your fish and it's a risk to your cuttles. That being said, we have had a couple escapee cuttlefish into different reef systems with fish, and I'm not sure what they ate, but I know that they did not eat the large tangs in the aquarium, so they would survive with big circular objects without eating them, from what I can tell, for whatever that's worth. So cephalopods are incredibly intelligent. They have this brain that is actually wrapped around their esophagus. So they have a beak in order to chew their food into little bite-sized pieces in order to not have an aneurysm as they swallow and the food travels through their brain. They have this large brain, people think, because they don't have a shell, and like the rest of their mollusk friends. And without the shell, they need to be clever and thoughtful about how to stay camouflaged, and part of that camouflage requires them to control all of the color pigmented cells across their body in an incredibly complex way. It requires some brain power. They have these extra large axons, nerve axons, required to operate this machinery. And they're often studied, these nerves, these large nerves are studied because they're easy to work with. So talking about their camouflage, really, really interesting system. The camouflage of cuttlefish is operated by 3 light organs. It's the chromatophore, the leucophore, and the iridophore. And these 3 cell types work together in order to take the pigments of the chromatophores and either reflect the light or to scatter it. And what that causes is incredible color changes. Quick mention on enrichment. I say meh. People say, a lot of times people will do enrichment for octopuses. Cuttlefish really don't need the same thing. This is considered, this is an extent of enrichment. You can see it doesn't really care and maybe just kind of irritated. People can add, maybe a TV in the room is the most I've heard for it, but the most enrichment that they really enjoy and engage with is with other cuttlefish. So if you keep them in a healthy social group, that's all they really want, and they want food. They're pretty simple. They don't need to solve puzzles. Look at that little cute guy. Oh, they're so great. And then the chromatophores. So this is actually footage I took with my iPhone, believe it or not, of Officinalis scale. Unfortunately, this is an Officinalis that passed away, and their chromatophores continue operating after respiration stopped and their pupils are dilated. I'm not sure what level of death that they've experienced, but these cells are still operating and putting on quite the show. You can see the skin contracting too. Cuttlefish are incredible at changing the texture of their skin. So cuttlefish the rainbow. Here's an example of the leucophores and iridophores, which are pretty prevalent in the Officinalis in the lower left-hand corner. The PJ squid are pretty much a one-trick pony of being more stripy and a little bit less stripy. And then the bandensis in the middle. Some more examples of the camouflage aspect of it. I've noticed that the bandensis are not aggressive camouflagers. So the babies tend to be that white color and they perch on the right side in that eelgrass, which maybe they would blend in better with a cream-colored or brown coral, but as you can see, they're not actively trying to blend into their surroundings in this situation. They use their colors for communication too. There's an Officinalis in the lower left-hand corner. They have that trademark white square on their back. And a lot of people will put them in checkerboard aquariums to study their reactions to doing that disruptive patterning to blend in. The communication in the bandensis varies from expressing emotions to each other, expressing threats and moods to predators. And this is interesting. They have the ability to change the color in half their body. This bandensis here is in a photo tank in order to film this. And he's trying to get behind that big chalice coral where his friends are all hidden away. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to give a color to me that he's hoping will make him, me not want to eat him. But if you see on his back, on the other half of his body, he's showing more aggressive, assertive coloration to his buddies, like, let me in there. I need to get back there. So, speaking of melanin, the cuttlefish ink I want to talk a little bit about. There's two types of inking. There is the pseudomorph and the smokescreen. A pseudomorph is Latin for false body, and that's when the cuttlefish will eject like a little poof of ink. So that's the false body of leaving behind, like, hit that thing, not me, and they try to get away. The bait and switch, if you will. And then the smoke screen is as advertised. This is more of a smoke screen inking when somebody freaked out, and it'll black out the tank. Now, people worry that ink is poisonous, is some sort of evil, mysterious aspect of cuttlefish that will kill the tank just because it happened once. They think of it like a sea slug going through a propeller, but it's not that bad. It's just mucus and melanin. So this is easily removed with a protein skimmer and a carbon and GFO, but you need to have that protein skimmer working, and you need to have the carbon and GFO running. They actually have ink carts at Monterey Bay Aquarium where they have where they have on a cart a big protein skimmer, a diatom filter, and a carbon and GFO reactor, where they wheel it to a tank where there's been a big inking event so they can filter it very quickly, in addition to their pre-existing. Hello? We have a blackout screen situation. So somebody, oh, thank you. So what is how can I help prevent that? Am I doing something?
Just try not to
Stop touching that?
move the computer around.
I moved the computer a little bit, yeah, okay. My bad.
It's okay.
Yep. So if they ink, don't panic, just be prepared. Oh, but it will kill them. I don't want to make it sound like, yeah, inking's great. It'll smother their gills, and it'll provide, that protein. It'll suffocate them if you leave it in there, and anything else in that tank. So locomotion. This cuttlefish is showing the swimming motion with the mantle, the walking with their 2 feet, which is something that the dwarf cuttlefish do with those 2 lower arms, and jetting. So they will take water into their mantle and then push it out through their siphon tube for a propulsion. So here is a pajama squid. Usually they are buried in the sand, not doing much. This pajama squid was letting me know how he felt about being in the photo tank when I first put him in there, and he was flashing lots of colors and trying to get out. So this is the most excited you'll ever see the pajama squid. And then he settled down and he blinked at me for an hour after that. Got pretty big fins for swimming. It's actually kind of impressive. So when they want to move, they can move. In this video, I'm going to show you how they bury in the sand. One thing that the pajama squid do that unfortunately I haven't gotten footage of yet is they will scoot down. There we go. They will scoot down under the sand, pushing their butt in and then shoveling their front in over again. And they also do this behavior you can see here where they will sort of play dead for a second if you disturb them, if you move them, and they'll flash their colors. But then the moment later you put them down, they'll often eat a shrimp, so they're fine. So what I didn't capture is they scoot down, and oftentimes they'll take 2 of their arms and they'll flip sand onto their back with just the tips of their tentacles in order to cover their bodies with more sand. Again, it's adorable. I'm sorry, I'm a scientist, but there is a cute factor here that is undeniable. It's very serious. And here's the Officinalis moving around. So the Officinalis will move. There we go. These guys are really, really social. So they're constantly at the front of the aquarium looking for interaction, attention, food. Really, it's more of a meal ticket situation, relationship. I'm not sure how much they want to hang out. But they're beautiful swimmers. They're often up in the water column. They're not buried that much. Officinalis are really a great animal for captivity, very hardy too. and the diet. So feeding cuttlefish is one of the more involved parts. Some of them are easier, some of them are harder. Live grass shrimp is a must. If you ever get a cuttlefish in, you want to make sure that you have live grass shrimp on hand in order to, even if they say that they're eating frozen, they're feeling nervous after being shipped, you want to make sure that you have something that is a sure thing. Grass shrimp are a sure thing. Other thing I love about feeding live grass shrimp is not only is it the most nutritious thing that they can be eating, but it's the easiest. It's something you can throw in there. It lives at saltwater. It can stay alive for as long as you have it in there. And you don't have to worry about cleaning up the mess afterward. Usually they eat the entire grass shrimp, tentacle to tail, or antenna to tail. So you can train them onto frozen food. Bendenses I prefer not to do frozen food with because they are messy eaters with frozen. They'll often leave half of their food on the ground, so you end up siphoning and netting out uneaten food every time you feed them. Grass shrimp, you just throw them in and walk away and forget it. Officinalis eat frozen readily. They're magical. I'll get into it later, but it's a dream. I didn't realize how hard bandenses were until I started raising the Officinalis and throwing frozen, and they eat it all right away. So food size is important. You don't want to feed them something too big in terms of, especially if it's a live food, it can often hurt the cuttle, and or they won't hit it. I mean, they're ambitious, but there is a limit to it. You also don't want to feed them something too small. If your cuttlefish is spending its energy trying to hit a bunch of undersized shrimp, those feeding tentacles are a fast twitch muscle of some variety I'm unfamiliar with, but they get exhausted. I've seen my bendenses, if I feed them shrimp that are too small, they'll hit 3, and then they'll actively aim for the 4th, 5th, and 6th, and they can't hit it because they've exhausted those muscles. So while they're still hungry, and then they keep trying to hit it, and they get more exhausted, and you actually have to get the food out of there to make them rest and stop trying to hit the food in order to regain the strength to accurately hit their next prey. So prey density, you want to make sure that you don't have too many shrimp in the tank with them. It can intimidate some of them, not the Officinalis, they don't care. But you want to make sure they have enough where they're going to eat a proper amount within a reasonable period of time, but not so many that it's going to intimidate them and then they're going to go into more of a hiding action. You also want to kind of like flood feed them if they're mature adults, because if you feed them too little too slowly, they'll often latch onto the same shrimp, and then they're like doing a very sloppy tug of war with their tentacles and twine, and then they start biting on each other's arms. It turns into a whole thing. So throw a bunch in and then monitor to see how much more you need to add or take out. They have little chewing mouths. Those were cuttlefish chewing away at their food, the beak inside their arms, and again, this miraculously tiny amount of poop that comes out despite all of what they eat. Here's that beak. This cuttlefish hit the window as like a aggressive reaction. Unfortunately, it makes them a challenge to ship too. You have to treat them very slowly, move them very slowly, otherwise they will do this aggressive stick on the side of the wall, and then they will chew through the bag, and you have a hole in a hurry. So me bagging cuttlefish is kind of this motion, trying not to freak them out. They ship great though. So again, unfortunately, this is a dead cuttlefish, but it shows you those feeding tentacles and how impressively long they are. Some of them are over the body length of the cuttlefish. And here's a feeding video with Alabama shakes. Hold on. One thing I was really interested about with these cuttlefish as I was watching them is that they get these shrimp. Shrimp, have these little claws. They're pretty aggressive. Like, how are these soft-bodied animals not getting hurt when they eat their food, and crabs and stuff like that? They always grab the back of this shrimp and have the legs sticking out. So I did some slow motion footage to see what is the grabbing process in that microsecond that gets the shrimp perfectly positioned. And you should see in a second, as they reach out, their tentacles go on either side of the back every time, no matter what the angle is. So when they pull it in, the legs are always facing out. There it is. Now we have slow-mo cameras on our iPhones. I've got to redo this with actual slow-mo instead of what it was probably an iPhone 5 or something horrific like that. So here's the video of the Pajama Squid and the Officinalis eating. They eat in a very similar fashion to the bandensis. This guy missed it that time, but these guys also shoot up, which is very interesting. The Pajama Squid seem to be more tolerant of small shrimp because they hunt somewhat infrequently. They're a pretty passive eater, as opposed to these Officinalis. These are young Officinalis, about a couple months old, and they're voracious. This is one where you have to throw a lot of shrimp in all at once, a lot of silver sides in all at once, otherwise they latch onto each other and fight in a hurry. So I think he's just interested in me because he knows I'm going to bring him food, but this is another thing that I love about the Officinalis and the bandensis is that they're kind of friendly. So those are some silver sides that I'm feeding them. So talking about a little sepia sexy time, the breeding basics for cuttlefish. They are separate sexes. They're not like clownfish where you can throw a few in and they're going to work it out and where you're going to get a proper ratio of males and females. You need to have a male and a female because they stay male or female from birth. The males can be aggressive maters. They will harass a female until she's wounded or exhausted. And they have a cool thing called a spermatophore, which is like a fuzzy white sperm packet which they deliver with a specialized heterococcygeal arm. The other interesting thing that they do with this arm that delivers their sperm packet into the female's mantle is they will actually remove competing sperm packets. So a lot going on, and that's why they're linked for a while. So sexing bandensis is pretty simple once they display, but until they display, males and females look identical. This is male coloration. So this is what a male or female could look like, that sort of camel pattern, but you have to wait for this distinctive black and white patterning to definitely identify a male. And the only way you can identify a female is A, she doesn't do this, and B, the definite way to do it is you'll see when they're mating, the male will have two arms on top, and hers will be below. So here the males are going, and they're displaying all the time. I came in one night and I was like, what's going on in there? And I shined a flashlight. They were doing this all night. They're displaying their vitality, they're displaying their posturing to show territories, and they're trying to warn the other cuttlefish away before it gets violent. This cuttlefish is saying back off when he has that giant frozen prawn in his mouth because he's about to get it stolen by all these other cuttlefish. These two here are in big compartments, and they've got this one divider with a tiny little mesh window at the bottom, and they spend all day every day just displaying to each other through that one window. They get really obsessed with either another cuttlefish on across the barrier or food items, so I recommend blacked out dividers if you really are going to have them separate, but it's also pretty impressive. They can get hurt. These are the bite marks on bandensis. They heal slowly, but if they're not too bad, they seem to live a normal life with them. This is a shocking event that I saw. Officinalis have been more violent in terms of the competition between males than I've ever seen before. This is a male dispatching with another male in his arms. You can see that mantle. I couldn't get them apart without, I was going to risk hurting the winning male. And so we transferred him to a separate compartment, a 10-gallon punishment, as he continued to harass other cuttlefish. And we named him the Officinalis because he was kind of a jerk. So beware of those mean guys. And here's a bandensis mating video. So it'll show you how they intertwine their arms. You can't really see the that specialized arm going in, but you can. They do embrace for quite a while, and they mate often. I'm going to start rushing through this because I got some babies to show you. Here's PJ squid mating. And misfires do happen. This is a spermatophore bundle on the male's face that somehow was not properly delivered. So if anybody knows something about Mary, this will make more sense. They are very eager to mate. So these are two flamboyant cuttlefish that I put in this acclimation bucket a few seconds before I took this video, and I noticed the moment they hit the bucket after traveling in a dark box for 24 hours being shaken around across the country, they wanted to get busy. So that male, he's got that white coloration. The female's that bigger, rounder guy. And they're mating in the acclimation bucket. So they did okay. They laid some eggs for me. This I thought was good. This demonstrates the danger of two different sizes. Usually if you put a smaller cuttle in with a larger cuttle, I thought I was going to see a death, and surprisingly, he just went for it. He's an ambitious little guy, and she was okay with it. But if I didn't remove him, she may have eaten him. So this is my first attempt at an incredible egg-laying video of the bandensis. This is producing a kind of crappy egg, but he's produced an egg and then she laid it. And this video is unfortunately, as you guys may have all experienced before, a photo and then another photo at the end instead of hitting record and stop recording. But I did get it in the end. What they do is they will inflate this egg inside of their tentacles, and they will try to completely cover it to probably protect it from anybody who would be interested in eating a cuttlefish egg until it's time to lay it. And then they wrap these strong protein strands around a coral, rock, pipe, netting, side of an aquarium, anything. And they secure it into these large grape-sized bundles. So here's the bandensis all stacked up. Here's some eggs. These are cuttlefish eggs for the bandensis that you can see the little babies developing inside. They will lay 12 to 200 per group. And the Officinalis eggs, this is a female that I caught laying. I lifted up the shell and she continued laying despite that. And it reminded me of a Renaissance painting. These PJ eggs are like pearls. They're so beautiful. This is an unedited photo on my iPhone, and they prefer to lay under big clamshells. For incubation, you want to do a netting bottom and have a gentle flow. I'm showing the eggs being blown around in this 10-gallon tank. You don't want to have them whipping around. Just make sure that they are well taken care of. Here is an incubator that they use for pretty often for PJ eggs sometimes, but more often flamboyant eggs, having the suction underneath to create that gentle tumbling. They sell these on Dr. Foster Smith now. So we do dip our eggs. So this is Jeff putting our eggs into a bucket of Revive, which is a common coral dip, in order to make sure that they don't have any copepods or anything that might chew on the eggs. And then you get babies if you're lucky. So here's some aquarium-related size references for this newborn cuttlefish. This is the bandensis. They're great little eaters. You want to make sure that you have live mysis for them. They hatch very small. And for bandensis, you need to feed them live mysis for probably about 6 weeks before they'll take anything bigger. You need to keep them in a compartment where they have proper cover. I like thin horizontal branches of like old acro so that they don't all pile in under one large surface and they all can see the mysis around them. They're tricky. Bandensis are tricky. They will starve quickly. They will, if the prey density isn't right, they won't eat properly. Officinalis are pretty easy. They start taking frozen mysis within the first couple weeks, and then they grow very, very quickly. Here's the Officinalis eating in their tank. This, you can actually fill their tank where it's almost opaque with mysis, and they're cool with it. They'll keep eating. You can put them in your hand and they'll keep eating. And the Pajama Squid are actually pretty relaxed too. So these are baby Pajama Squid. I give them a little bit of substrate. You don't want too much, otherwise it's harder to keep track of them. But you definitely want to feed them live mysis, and you have to feed them for a while. But they don't seem to eat as much as the high-energy Officinalis. So here's that baby ambitiously taking on bigger prey. Once they start going down that route, they're eager to do it. Sometimes they're a little too ambitious. This poor cuttle got whipped around 5 times, you'll see here, because he hit it wrong. And this is when, you know, it's funny this time, but they can get hurt if you put them in with something too large. And a large grass shrimp can definitely eat a baby cuttlefish too if you really misjudge that size. So we get large river mice, smaller grass shrimp. We have to collect them at our local river. They do have interesting camouflage behaviors and hunting behaviors as babies. Oops, this is worth it. Or not. There we go. So they will sway back and forth like a little clump of algae, even if there's no current, in order to camouflage and get closer to their prey item. And this behavior baffled me for a long time until I finally found a paper about it. This is a baby cuttlefish that has seen a mysis across the tank, and he thinks that this is the most discreet way to approach that mysis. So I called this a stealthy elephant, and I was like, I don't know what they're thinking. And I found a paper, miraculously, that explained that they think it's actually them trying to imitate a Neisseria snail. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. But they're a lot of fun. Like I said, I got to 9 generations with the bandensis, and then I took a little bit of a break. I want to mention this algae very quickly. This is a hair algae that grows pretty regularly in the system above the reef. And I went to clean this tank one day, and I was doing it very conservatively, not to protect the cuttlefish, but just to avoid a big mess in the tank. So I had the scraper right with the siphon, attached to the siphon. So any algae that I scraped up, it went right down. Despite that, I look up, and a few seconds later, as I'm cleaning this tank, whoops, I see this. Please play. There. These cuttlefish look dead. They looked as, they stopped breathing. This is a coloration I've never seen before in the bandensis. They were floating around, arms limp, in an almost death-like position. I haven't seen them do this with mag chloride either. It's too bad this is not working. And it was from the algae. I thought this was a fluke, and then I disturbed the algae again in their tank, and they did this. I actually even just took a piece of algae and out, and it dripped over a baby compartment, and all of the babies started floating around too. So I'll do some research and let you know what the hell that was about. You're looking at cuttlefish pictures all day. Everything is a pajama squid. This is a Desjardini that I thought was a pajama squid going through my photos. There's some cookies that I thought might be a pajama squid thing. And then the day that I did the portraits of that one squid in that photo compartment, there was a woman on the front page of the newspaper that was definitely a pajama squid. So this was the day I was taking those photos. So there's great resources out there for cuttlefish. This book is fantastic. I highly recommend it. There's some good articles out there. Rich is always there to answer your questions, so please feel free. Call him anytime, text him. It doesn't really matter what time. Just go for it. And, it's still there. I just really want you to get that number. No, it's my phone number. Don't worry about it. So, well, there's one more page of references, but it's not showing up, so we'll just leave you with that phone number. And thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.